والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad. I'd like to welcome you all in this symposium on the experiences of Islamic movements in governance and politics. We have already examined this week Lebanon, Palestine, and on Sunday we started examining the situation in Yemen. And today, in our final day, our study and research would be about the Isla Party and the Isla Consortium. We will have two sessions. The first is going to start right now, and it's going to be entitled The Background and the Evaluation of Policies and Performance and Lessons Learned from this Experience. We have four distinguished speakers. The first presentation is going to be about the vision of Al Islah Party in Yemen for the concept or notion of the state, and Dr. Adnan Al-Udaini is going to present, and he's the head of the Information, Media and Culture Department in the Islah Party, and he was the head of the executive committee in the Yemeni Party coalition, and also a supervisor of the common meeting, and he was also a member of the National Dialogue Committee. He would be followed by a presentation by Mr. Mustafa Al Gypsy, who is a PhD student and a researcher and a former Yemeni diplomat in France, and he's an independent analyst and researcher specialized in political education and political Islam and geopolitics. He is working on his PhD in sociology in Lyon University in France. His presentation is going to be the general parameters, policy parameters for Al Islah Party, like the political performance towards the authority, the community, and external relations. The third presentation or lecture is going to be on the experience of Al Islah Party in the Arab Spring and the storm of resolve by Dr. Nasser Al-Tawil. Dr. Nasser Al-Tawil is a professor of politics in Sana'a University, and he's specialized in Islamic movements, and he has many publications, including the Islamic movement and political system in Yemen. He also contributed to a number of publications, including some very well-known researchers, particularly in Islamic movements, the future of Islamic movements. Can you speak to the microphone? And the Arab Spring. The last presentation in this morning's session is going to be about Al Islah Party and their post-conflict vision and the lessons learned and future prospects for Mr. Fahad Sultan. Mr. Fahad Sultan is a Yemeni journalist who contributed to a number of researches and studies, including a book on the Middle Legion experience and a research about the Houthi movement and their emergence and spread, and the number of revisions in Islamic thought, and has a number of publications and articles in political and Islamic affairs. Thank you so much for you all for coming to our center this morning and for contributing to this symposium today. Mr. Adnan is going to be the first presenter, and he will present remotely via the internet. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad. I would like to welcome you all and salute SIGA for this series of symposia about the Islamic movements in different places. And I would have loved this study to include all political movements in Yemen, and I would also like to thank all the researchers on the Islah Party and the Islah Consortium. It is great to have Al-Islah be the subject of so much examination and study. What I am going to present is not going to be a pure study nor a pure political address. What I am going to undertake is an attempt to understand the political action itself in the Yemeni experience and looking into its motivations and trying to understand the impact that it has left on the national arena. We stand in the middle point between the previous moment in history, which constitutes a number of events into which we should read to understand, and the future, which is in the formation. Before we talk about the Yemeni state, I will have to define the Isla Party very briefly. It is a party that started in the 90s in Yemen, and it depended completely on its constituency or voters. The legacy of both ruling powers with a pre-unity power and the other authorities. Islah Party, on the contrary, depended completely on its public constituency to reach to power, and it is the only party that reached to power through a vote. And it contributed and participated in all elections and never boycotted local or parliamentary or presidential elections. And it mostly wins the majority of votes, particularly in Taz and Sana'a. And it also wins the majority in student unions and teachers unions, etc. And it also contributed to the 2011 events, and it was at the forefront of the revolution and had its impacts and impact and influence, and it contributed to the national dialogue until there was a coup against its outcomes. If we talk about the experience of al-Islah and the pattern of governance in Yemen, first of all, we need to talk about the power or authority in Yemen in the historical moment right before September and October revolutions. It is a form of power or authority on which no modern concept or no definition of a state can be used, and we cannot either jump to the future without understanding this part better. There are a number of features or characteristics that identify the type of ruling power we had before those two revolutions in September and October, and those can be summarized in the following. First of all, in terms of the background in which the political authority stands before the two revolutions, they were basically based on a number of divisions which existed in the Yemeni community and society and exploited them to emerge and stabilize this governance. So those divisions, be it regional, sectarian, or tribal, the authority wouldn't have stabilized had it not been for the mobilization of those divisions and invoking the fact or the claim that they stand in the face of those divisions. In addition, there were a number of hegemonies and powers that the authority used to dominate the political scene. In terms of the social system, it was a vertical social system which allowed the party on top of the hierarchy to take all the power. So there was a vertical power system, particularly in the north of Yemen, that is very close to the Sultanate that was established in the south as well. So this vertical social system was a monopoly, created a monopoly of authority, but also made this authority a privilege for the few. As for the way or the method of reaching to power, although the Yemeni people used to contribute or participate in getting one party or the other to power, but as soon as those powers reached to power, they would remove the impact and influence of people, so they use force, coercive and violent means to maintain authority and power. Although this authority stabilized over the Yemeni territory, it was in constant antagonism with the Yemeni history and culture, which was an adversary, basically. Their legitimacy was based particularly in the areas governed by imama, in their right to power from a religious point of view, making them in a direct confrontation with the general identity of the Yemeni community and with the Yemeni legacy and history. This decision from the ruler would the public opinion or public will was neutralized. Only the will of the ruler mattered, with the monopoly of power without referring to the popular or public will. So those are some of the characteristics related to the political system that existed before September and October revolutions, which is related to the geography that you try and you have to weaken the center of society and render it unable to confront this monopolic authority or crush it, and the vertical social system helped this power or this authority maintain power, in addition to the violent means through which they maintained this power, and also the attitude towards Yemeni culture and history was also a source of conflict between those rights as regarded by those in power and the rights as regarded by the public. Only the will of the ruler mattered in that sense. In other words, those patterns imposed a power or an authority that was in direct contrast with the will of the Yemeni people, and it used the divide and rule approach and claimed to be a unifying power, but actually was divisive and monopolic. This state was supposed to overcome this issue, and any discourse about the unity of the Yemeni society was in order to establish the new foundations for the state, in addition to the social system, which is supposed to be a horizontal rather than a vertical one, given that the vertical social the horizontal social system helps establish a sense of citizenship, because the vertical social system enshrined a class-based or a hierarchical system that excluded the public from authority and power. Also, it was necessary to establish a new method of reaching to power, which is a peaceful method, because that's the function of politics. So the way you reach to power defines the attitude and behavior of authority in power, and the use of violence and arms has always affected the attitude of those in power. Also, the right to which is the background of the legitimacy of power, which is the public will, which is supposed to be the backbone of authority and power. It was no longer enough to justify the ruler's will and justify the behavior of the state by this exclusive manner, and it was important to factor in the public Yemeni will, the will of the people, that is. This was an introduction about the state. In order to, I'm not trying to approach this academically, but to speak about the process of the emergence of the concept of the state and the interaction with this concept with this Yemeni people. But I wanted to highlight the contradiction between the existing power and the aspired power and system of governance. The most important feature about the aspired power was that it reflected all of the Yemeni people, and it reflected the will of the public. In addition, the method of reaching power needs to be enhancing and only reinforcing for the public will. So it was no longer acceptable for power to be based solely on the will of the ruler. So in terms of the Yemeni Consortium for Islah, according to this concept, there are a number of factors which governed all of the Yemeni experience, which was in contradiction to the old Yemeni power or authority and aspired for a completely different and opposite form of power. Al-Islah was affected by a number of influences. Needless to say that Yemen, before October and December revolutions, used to live under the Imam rule in the north and under the colonization in the south, and the colonization was the result of a number of sultanates that emerged or that were present in the south, and both the regime or the governance system in the north tried to deny the full territoriality of or geography of Yemen, and it signed agreements endorsing the division of this territory, and the regime or the authority in the south tried to deny its relation with history in order to link its presence to part of that geography. But the reality was that there was a Yemeni people on the whole of geography. So the authority in the south wanted to take a part of that geography, while by severing their relations to the history, and the authority in the north wanted also to take a part of that territory or geography. Both were hence separatists projects, but a Yemeni vision and a Yemeni project should have been comprehensive and pan-Yemeni for all Yemenis, and there needed to be a movement that is enshrined in Yemeni history and that invokes the overall concept of Yemeni people, of their identity and their state. As for the Islah Consortium, there are a number of factors that helped this experience mature. When we talk about the experience of parties in Yemen, we're talking about this experience as events and developments and practices rather than texts and words. While studying those experiences, we have to consider this meaning very well. So the number of features or factors that helped this Islah Consortium to emerge was the national battle that the reformist elite that later formed Al-Islah Party started against the hierarchical vertical regime of or system of governance. So it started a movement against this social system because there was no ruling family that would be toppled by just by a simple revolution, but it has become enshrined within the social fabric, so much so that an imama was present not just at the top of the power hierarchy, but in every smaller or local community. Imama was present in a smaller or a micro level. So this imama version that was used in villages, urban places, and towns, they excluded or claimed an exclusive right to power, while the representation of religion, they were exclusive representatives of religion, according to their view. Also, this category was the only category that received money without or payment without working. They had a surplus and became affluent, that they were able to rule in the Yemeni community while they did very little work, while the general public had to work very hard to receive a little money and pay it for this small category of people. And as much as they have monopolized the representation of politics and religion, they have also monopolized politics. And if they also had the financial and economic freedom and its tool, which is money. So all of those tools were put in the hands of this small group of people. So Al-Islah Consortium was a formation that emerged from the ranks of the teachers who, after their study, came back to rural areas, and they started to dismantle religious authority and power to the regular people. Even the Jum'ah sermon was given by a single category and monopolized by a single category. But then under this new approach, anyone could specialize in jurisprudence and do the Friday sermon. So they contributed to tearing apart this system, but this did not please the political system, because the political system which existed encouraged this divisive approach. So the idea of turning this into the republic was the point where they tried to establish equal citizenship. There were many movements that contributed into it, including Al-Islah, one of the movements that tried to rescue the Yemeni community from the status quo and from the hierarchy So they didn't want to accept the monopoly of power by the hands of the few. The other factor that helped the idea of a modern Yemeni state to emerge and mature within the Yemeni Consortium for Islah was the revolutions of September and October, and those two republics had excluded the public from the equation of power and authority, despite the legitimacy of the power that came after the revolution, which was supposed to be a revolutionary leadership or revolutionary legitimacy. But after those two revolutions, until the Yemeni unity, there was no genuine presence and representation for the public in authority. And this was manifested in the mechanism through which one can reach to power. So in the former authority, it depended on armament, military power, and excluding political parties and the public from power and authority. And this was the reason why we continued to have this monopoly despite all the achievements in both revolutions in terms of nurturing the national spirit and the national affiliation, freeing people from minor or subnational affiliations, and within all of those sub-identities, and establishing the idea of allegiance to the greater Yemen and addressing all the vulnerabilities and problems of the society, and overcoming the extreme power of the state that took advantage of those divisions earlier. The people in the south were not only deprived of their right to reach power, but citizens were also deprived of their right for self-expression, and the objectives of the revolution were almost political taboos. So this was one of the factors that gave rise to the idea of the republic, and the plurality entails therein to be adopted by Al-Islah, as we are going to elaborate later. The third factor that affected this review of the idea of a state in Yemen was the balance between plurality and unity. As much as there was a taboo made on plurality and political diversity, there was now an intertwining of the idea of unification as well as a plurality. So it became, although this division was as a source of strength for the former authority that depended in its power on the divisions within the ranks of the Yemeni people, but it's the cohesion of the Yemeni fabric, social fabric, and the Yemeni people were a point of strength for the society. So this correlation between this Yemen unity and political plurality, which would not have emerged had it not been for this diversity and openness, and because of this historical evolution, which culminated in the announcement of the Yemeni unity. Every time there is a decline in Yemeni unity, we would notice that a corresponding decline in freedom of speech or in diversity and political plurality. The fourth factor, which affected the maturity and emergence of the idea of the state, which is adopted by Al-Islah, was the idea of elections and democracy in particular. Al-Islah was the political phenomenon, that emerged after the unification of the Yemen. Both political ruling parties had to deal with the legacy they had received from the Shatri state, whether in terms of their military might or public support. But while Al-Islah came from within its constituency, within the public, and depended on elections in reaching power and in reaching a point where they have a meaningful role in political participation and the political affairs in the community. And that's why Al-Islah Consortium was very keen on participating in each and every round of elections, local, parliamentary and presidential, and what helped participate in those elections on local, parliamentary or presidential elections was that they focused on this electoral right and this issue, which is elections, given that elections have given Al-Islah the legitimacy they needed. Your time expired. How long more do you need? I feel I am at the beginning. You have spoken for more than 25 years. Actually, speaking about the Yemeni Consortium for Islah is such a great undertaking, of course, but we have 9 speakers, not just a single speaker.
But I think you should have made it 2 days for this experience. I need more time. Okay, try to finish or to conclude in 3 minutes, please. Give us the results, the conclusion that you want the listener to come up with after your paper. And your paper will be issued in a book and it will be present on the website. Okay, in general, I will be short. So these factors that led to the Yemeni Islah movement, they got to the authority through elections. And the third topic, which is the political experience of the Yemeni grouping of Islah. And here it's very important to say or to talk that we have a relation with the authority and with other parties. And here we talk about the elections for the Al-Islah. Al-Islah group was with the legitimacy of the state, especially after the parliament was established, that moved with the legitimacy of the ruling parties, and it ruled it and it established it within the structures of the parliament, and it became one of these made it one of the strong institutions. I mean that the position at that time wasn't for the socialist party, but it was for the institution at the time. And Al-Islah movement was the one that allowed for this structure, and it wavered for the socialist party. And Al-Islah made a precedence in the elections. This precedence meant that it's not necessary that all those who come to authority are necessarily get there by the use of weapons, as the tradition was in Yemen. So Al-Islah was its reaction of getting it out of the authority. It tended to strengthen the state by the second political system through an opposition that is out of the control of the political system. The political system was a lame one, which means that the ruler is in control of the practice of authority and authority in general. There was no opposition to the authority. Therefore, Al-Islah movement put the second pillar. The second pillar is the one that will establish the political system to make the system stable on two pillars, the authority and the opposition. Okay, give us the main idea in 1 minute, please. Usually, I summarize. I gave you the time for summarization, so I'm not going to summarize. This is the 16th session, and after each session, I used to summarize. So I gave you the time of summarization in order to continue. So for the Al-Islah, they believe in one Yemeni state as one of the conditions of the political system itself. That this system should be a republican, and getting to this system should be through elections, and the will of the people is the effective one. And Al-Islah didn't only focused on the electoral districts, but they also focused on the civil society, so in the union of students in universities and the elections of the syndicates. So this was a very important factor for its success because the Al-Islah came from amongst the peoples, and it relied on the people to get its legitimacy to become a difficult figure in the authority in the country. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I am really sorry to interrupt you, but because today we have a lot of speeches, I'm not going to summarize everything that you said, but the main idea of your paper is that this Yemeni society is a vertical societal system, and it is a tribal system also from which it gets its legitimacy, in addition to the economic and political legitimacy that comes from that. And it says that the Al-Islah belief is that Yemenis are in one state, and the republican system reduce these factors that might prolong or delay the rise of the Yemeni society into the ranks of other parts. Thank you very much, Mr. Adnan. You will have a final remark at the end of the session as well. Now we move to Mr. Mustafa Al Gypsy. Introduced him earlier. His paper will be under the title "The Parameters of the Party, Its Interaction with the Authority, and the International Foreign Relations." Maybe he is going to speak about the other aspects that Mr. Adnan didn't have time to continue. Mr. Mustafa has a PowerPoint that he wants to share, so he needs to have a screen sharing feature.
تفضل أستاذ مصطفى.
Mr. Mustafa, the floor is yours.
في البداية أشكر الجامعة وأشكر
In the beginning, I would like to thank SIGA and Sabah Al Nizam University for organizing this event. And thanks for the invitation to present my paper. As the professor said, the title of my paper is "The Relation of Al-Islah with the Society, the Authority, and the Foreign Powers." I have three topics that will be tackled in my paper. Each one of them will be taken together, but I will speak in general to give a general idea, and I will start with tracking the socio-historic or relation in the society of Yemen, and it will speak about the dividing the periods of Al-Islah in 3 periods. In each one of these periods, there were parts and how it moved from one generation to the other, and then the changes and the outside changes and how it interacted with that. And then it will have a critique preview, and we will see what are the problems that we had in terms of identity, women and social relations, the oppression and period. What I'm going to say is that it will be similar to what Mr. Adnan said. In the first century, the first half of the 20th century in Yemen, things were very miserable. We didn't have economic or development, and there was a medieval situation in Yemen, so to speak, and the situation in general was a conflicting situation, and we didn't have a new political ideas. They were old reformist ideas, but that are coming up from its environment, but they were not enough to confront the colonization or the imamhood, which made Yemen more isolated. So we needed to have more ideas or new ideas, and we learned from our Arab environment more. There was two currents. One of them was more revolutionary, and the other one was more tending towards a religious reform. So in Yemen, in the first half of the 20th century, we had leftist wave and wave of Muslim Brotherhood. So the students who went to Cairo and other capitals like Iraq, they were influenced with these ideas, and when they came back to Yemen, they have found the grounds to improve these ideas, especially in terms of the leftist ideology. And we know that the revolution of 1948, it had someone who is close to the Muslim Brotherhood, and most of the changes started to happen towards the end of the first half of the 20th century. And here we can say that the establishment of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in 63, it was the first nucleus for the currents that we have in Yemen. Of course, these trends had a different rhetoric, because we were talking about class fights between the proletariat and the others, and the religious discourse was different. It was taking from the same religious background, but the rhetoric was new. There was more capability of the religious current to build or to be attractive to the society, because it was closer to the people in society, unlike the leftist current, which found it difficult to attract people to it. In general, the religious current got into alliance with the tribes, and this conflict between the two discourses appeared at the moment of the establishment of the republic and the political identity and social identity of the state. In the north, the conflict was represented very clearly, and it was sold for the traditional and the religious current in November 1968, in a conflict within the Republican parties, and the tribal, traditional, and religious currents won, whereas in the south, the leftist current was victorious. And in the beginning, the political forces, they were not in conflicting with the religious currents, but it was with the conflict with other currents. The characteristics of the work of the Islamic or the Islamist work, it was promoted more with the failure of the nationalist project, and there were some impact of other Arab capitals like Damascus, Baghdad, and Cairo, and and it moved to Saudi Arabia more. So we started to see more Salafist discourse, and there was a combat against socialism and communism, whether in Yemen or in the Islamic world, and Yemen became a front to protect Saudi Arabia and the oil and to fight socialism and communism, and it became as a tool in the hands of the American hand. All of that ended with the political diversity, and Al-Islah was established at that time. At the time, the political Islam wasn't a political entity. So it was established with the unity, which was conditioned, as Adnan said, with the political diversity. The idea of Al-Islah was to be a parallel to the Congress. It wasn't in opposition. And Al-Islah, from its beginning and background, which came from Muslim Brotherhood background or Salafi backgrounds, or the new reformist current that was in Yemen that started before.
سأعطي توضيحات لمسمى التيارات السياسية. أنا أتحدث كما لو أني أتحدث إلى يمنيين وبالتالي
I'm speaking as if I am talking to Yemenis, so I will clarify the terminology later for non-Yemenis. So in 1994, the unity happened, and the two parties that established this unity were two parties. In the south, it was the Socialist Yemeni Party, which was at the head of the Democratic Popular or People's Republic, and on the north, it was the Public Congress, which was head by Ali Abdullah Saleh, and there were several parties established, including religious parties, including Al-Islah grouping movement, and there were other nationalist and leftist groups like the Nasri or the Ba'ath Party, and so many other parties, but they were small in numbers. The Yemeni grouping of Islah, of course, it was as a group of alliances starting from its background and its historical experience. It included security personnel, military personnel, sheikhs of tribes leaders, and religious leaders. So it was a grouping of those alliances, but with an ideological and religious characteristic. I said also there were Salafists. Some of those in the south, because in the south, a socialist state was established, and maybe it was the only Marxist state in the Arab world. So the situation wasn't open neither to other political groups or to an Islamic group. So any other grouping, they were opposition with the authority, or any religious groups or figures, they moved to the north, and most of them were part of the Al-Islah Party or the Islah grouping movement. In Al-Islah, we have diversity, and this diversity led to a diversity in visions. Maybe there is general objectives, but there were diversity in the visions. The political system from the revolution until 1990, from 68 to 1990, it was side by side with the political system. So it fought in its war or in the conflicts between the north and the south of Yemen. So the religious current was to the side of the regime. So the military and the security sides wanted this regime to continue because they contributed to its establishment. Afterwards, the current of the Muslim Brotherhood, they had more political vision, which is represented in establishing a society that is in line with the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. This understanding or this diversity leads to diversity in functions. Al-Islah Party, it wasn't an opposition from the 1990 to the 1994, within the first elections. As I said, it was in parallel, or it was supportive of the regime. But in 1994, when the two founding parties, after the elections, had conflicts or disputes about the authority, Al-Ba'ath was to the side of Ali Abdullah Saleh, and Al-Islah or Al-Islah came to the side of Saleh, and they had a role in the winning of Saleh in this war because it gave a religious aspect of that war, or to the side of Saleh. I'm not talking about the legality of that war. This is a completely different thing, but this had impact at a later stage, and this supported other points in that I will explain later. Al-Islah has started its political work with da'wah or preaching mentality. So all of its history or heritage that it has built since its establishment until the beginning of the diversity, it led it that it didn't understand the periods of the diversity, and it was influenced with the rejection of the other and the da'wah mentality, and it was shocking to the society with its ideology. This impacted the society because trying to Islamize the society, it was using its own identity, and it was trying to spread its own ideology, and it's ideologized or indoctrinated the public sphere in general. And there was an understanding that Ali Abdullah Saleh will be in the political authority provided that Al-Islah is in control of the society. In 1997, one of the parties that were put away from authority was Al-Islah movement and all other parties. So it turned to an opposition party. This is the second period for me, or I consider this a second period, and this is important for Al-Islah party because its discourse changed from a da'wah discourse to a political discourse. It was very pragmatic, so it got closer to the to other ideological adversaries in the parties, and all of them became brothers in arm, so to speak, in their political struggle. And they were in other groups, like in the joint meeting or al-liqa al-mushtarak, and or other Islamic groupings. And when we say Islamic groupings, Al-Islah is the largest one within that. But there was Al-Haq party and another party, and both of them are belong to the Zaydi school of thoughts. But there are also the Nasserist and the socialist parties. This period was very important in Yemen. Ali Abdullah Saleh was very strong, but the opposition was also active in the country. The opposition was strong, and it led to the participation in elections, whether the political parliamentarian elections or other. And it was a blow to Ali Abdullah Saleh because the opposition presented one candidate who was bin Shamlan, and there was a very active political environment at the time, and this added, and Al-Islah added to its adversaries Ali Abdullah Saleh. So the adversary was included a number of conflicts. There was, for example, the Saada war, and it was a kind of a rebellion in the north of the country for a group that is called the Houthi, and they are in control of Sana'a. And in the south, because of the war of the 1993, there are a lot of things that were not resolved, so we got into a system that didn't, and the political system didn't take into consideration that the south was leftist and the Marxist, so we got into the open market economy, and at the time a lot of poverty started to appear and people's condition declined. Al-Islah and Saleh relations start to break down, especially when Ali Abdullah Saleh has started to prepare his son to inherit the authority. Of course, inheritance in the authority, of course, goes against the system of republic that was established and instilled in the country from the 60s to the 90s. And there were regional and internal fears that the United States will accept Islamic movements in the region. So having a political movement or an Islamic movement that works in democracy will confuse the calculations of some of regional countries.
But the tactics of the Islah was to go to Al-Iman University or other rapprochement with other political blocs, including the Salafi bloc. This period extended until 2011. It's actually culminated in 2011 when we had the popular revolution. Political parties used to think in the sense of compromise. They didn't want confrontation. They accepted elections even when they were rejected by the authorities, in hope that change in slow political shifts and the changes. But the public were surprised everybody by moving forward to the street. It was a good opportunity for Al-Islah to take the lead. So this opposition became the party with which people spoke. So Al-Islah effectively came back to power. There was regional cohesion, as we know, from the Arab Spring because of their demands and because of their career or their public, because they brought forward the Islamic movements or Islamic blocs to power. In Yemen, the government that came to power after 2011 was a coalition government. And so the Islamists got half the government. And they had partners. In 2011, it is a turning point not just in Yemen, but in the region. The Arab Spring divided the region into two main axes, the supporters and the rejectionists. And here Islah had a rapprochement with backers, which is like Qatar and Turkey, while the party that lost power started the counter-revolution and became closer to the counter-revolution axis in the region. This did not last for long. By the end of 2014, in September in particular, the situation exploded again, and the Houthis took power in Sana'a, Aden, and Hodeidah, and we lost this coalition formula through which Al-Islah was able to get to power. Al-Islah was targeted for many reasons. The wars that were waged by the regime against the Houthis, the active parties in those wars on the side of the regime were people considered affiliated with the Islah Party. So we had three blocks, basically. We have the leftists, the National Congress, and the Houthis on the other side. The Houthis took over the institutions at the time and took the resources. Because of this legacy, many powers and many parties were loyal or allied with the Houthis because they wanted to eliminate their adversaries. So they wanted to make use of their resources, and so they started to take one town after the other. I have finished in the first 10 minutes. The first part of, or the first half of my presentation. Now I will speak about the other side, what Al-Islah has done throughout this history, how this reflected on its politics and its identity. In terms of identity, it is an ideological religious group. The people in Islah refuse this definition, but they cannot but acknowledge their ideological and religious background. Their dawah nature provides it with incentive to spread. Hence, there are strict social criteria based on the symbols and values, and this symbolic authority excludes criticism. So when you affiliate with this party, you not only affiliate with that identity, but with the whole affiliation. So this party constitutes a structure within a society with a hierarchy that is different from the conventional hierarchy of the tribes, for example, or with other religious leaderships or lineages. The Islah Party had a new vision of this and introduced a new hierarchy. However, they were unable to break all the previous restrictions and were quite pragmatic. We noticed that in the first formation of the Islah Consortium, they put a tribal leader on top of their hierarchy, although they were not as much with the same, shared the exact same ideological background, which proves that the Islah Consortium dealt with this sensibility and sensitivity in the society and tried to be pragmatic about it. Also, there were some strict criteria for recruitment, and there is a lot of literature on this in the literature of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the party was not integrating. It had a strict hierarchy within its structure. It did not share power, and the vertical structure allowed sharing information from top to bottom, but not the other way around. And it created a social sub-identity supported by institutions and a parallel economy. So Al-Islah had its own society and created a sub-identity, so it was a bit isolated, or its members were a bit isolated. Their commitment to the party or to religion made them isolated from their surroundings, and sometimes this is based not just on current isolation, but a constant isolation. And it is a day-to-day behavior of the individual members of Al-Islah as they practiced common social and religious rituals. They also had a number of resources and ideological frameworks that was a bit broad, and when we had this explosion of information and this broad ideological framework, it was confusing for the people, but the society, as we said, in the 60s emerged looking for answers and looking for a republic or for the notion of the state. They knew the sheikhdom, but they didn't know the state before they started to ask those big questions. So the legacy of Al-Islah, or that Al-Islah inherited, was to persist in Islamic rule, but to defy the idea of imama. There was also the literature of the Muslim Brotherhood, which stripped Al-Islah from their Yemeni identity, because Al-Islah imported many common Islamic literature by various authors or sources from across the board. Al-Islah, and we did not have a specifically Yemeni character. We have to say that Al-Islah was affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, but also to Yemen. Then there was this dialectic between the dawah and the political within the structure of al-Islah. Then they started to further commit to the idea of a republic and to the Yemeni identity by referring further back into history, even beyond and further than the Islamic era. And it was probably the wars that led to this change. After 26 years of working in public and previously working in secret, this change of discourse was in response to the change in the Yemeni dynamics. To move to the issue of women, and there are many criticisms to the situation of women with al-Islah. The coercions and the incentives given to members are basically religious, mainly. And sometimes they are social by being engaged in a specific social structure away from the general social structure. But for women, in addition to those criteria or obligations which are religious, women are subject to further restrictions in terms of shame and traditions, women, which does not apply as much to men. So social justifications were used to oppress the reformist voices within the ranks of the Islah itself. So women were considered an important bloc inside Islah and inside the Yemeni community, but they were mere voters. But we only have one women parliament member. As we said, it is a group that tries to talk about society being conservative. They wouldn't claim that it's religion, but to refer to society. So it is more or less a patriarchal, male-dominated organization and structure. In terms of its social demands, al-Islah has the ability to mobilize the public, but they used an ideological attitude to politics more than being responsive to the sentiment of the public. So in the 90s, for example, the al-Islah moved and mobilized the people in order to press for Sharia to be the sole source of legislation in the constitution. At a time, we were at a decisive point in Yemeni history where we're moving from a socialist economy to an open economy, a great inflation, the Gulf crisis, which incurred an economic crisis, while this religious group, including al-Islah, was mostly concerned with Sharia with no regard to the human being who is the objective of Sharia. They were more concerned with their ideology than with the sentiment of the public, and they had no economic vision for society at all. And this is clear, be it in their vision of marginalized groups or minorities. They had wishful thinking that had a religious tenor or trait. Al-Islah did not provide a suitable environment for social embetterment. We had an already existing hierarchy, the tribes leaders, the elites, the men of religion, but in the lower strata of the hierarchy, there was some nobility, while the upper side did not change much. But if we look at the owners of capitals within the ranks of al-Islah, we will find that the elites reflect the traditional social structure and hierarchy, and there is no way for social progression for other strata. And we said that he had no vision for social change as well. In my opinion, Islah does not practice political action through a professional approach, but the main block in Al-Islah is a religious group, while political action requires competence in politics. The other point, when you accept a new member, you use a religious criteria rather than a political criteria. So the leadership is conscious and aware, while the base had very little understanding of politics. And that's why when we had negotiations and rapprochement, the leadership was understanding, but the bases did not agree to this rapprochement. Since their emergence until 2014, Al-Islah was parallel to the authority. It wasn't oppressed. It made use of being parallel. It wasn't in power, but it established its own system, and it contributed to building the system and protecting it. And as we said, the revolution was more about the and there are some ideological criteria actually why it wasn't in the opposition, why it wasn't oppressed, because they believe the state is a group of human beings. But in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, until the 1994, Al-Islah, or the religious groups, rather than Al-Ihsan, they served the regime against their adversaries. So this relation made it a parallel rather than excluded from the authority. In addition, their vision of reform and economy was in line with the state of the North, or of unity, one that was unified but lacked any economic vision, and based on alliances like Abdullah Saleh, who based his regime on alliances with men of religion, businessmen, etc. So as we said, Al-Islah was not oppressed. And it was parallel, and it's premature to assess this period. But since 2014, of course, Al-Islah became oppressed because of the killings, the arrests, etc. But now that we have a change in the discourse of Al-Islah, they are more serious in their consideration of the idea of imama than in the 70s, and how to face up to sectarianism and how to effect a reform and the secularism as a potential solution, and their organizational cohesion. Those are very important questions, since Al-Islah are in the oppressed side now. And finally, Al-Islah in the 60s, 70s, and 80s gave much of its priority to fighting communism, which was a temporary challenge in comparison with Al-Imama, which started 1,000 years ago. So in their non-public or undeclared work and declared work, their discourse did not include and involve the idea of the republic. So the concept of the republic was not present. The affiliation and belonging to Yemen or the state was not present, but there was an overarching identity and belonging to the nation.
الإصلاح حزب يتطور ويتكيف، لديه براغماتية كبيرة.
Of course, this party is developing and is pragmatic. and has witnessed very little changes in its structure for many reasons, including concerns about division, etc. And they have also introduced some sub-identities which they need to reinforce through a common or pan-national identity, and they should not clash with national or social taboos, and that's why they free themselves from their social commitments in liberating women, supporting marginalized groups or minorities in Yemen, and also speaking about al-Islah and their existing tools, these are not enough in the face of modern and contemporary challenges. It's not enough to challenge Imama, but it is important also to handle modern concepts such as human rights and others.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mustafa, for this deep and elaborated presentation, which took us to spaces that we indeed wanted to be present in this conference. So thank you indeed. Now, the third paper will be for Dr. Nasser Al-Tawil, and it is about Al-Islah experience in the Arab Spring and the Resolve Storm, or Asifat Al-Hazm military operation, and about the foreign relations, which means that this was part of the paper of Mr. Mustafa, and he might elaborate more on this aspect when he speaks about the foreign relations. Okay, I am very happy to be here with you, and I am happy to be with you.
والحقيقة أنه طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا سعيد للغاية.
So I am very happy to be with you in this event at SEGA, which is interested in the Islamic movement, and in Turkey, that we expect to be a country that is where the Islamic relations or Islamic interests are being taken care of. A lot of things were mentioned by the two speakers before me. That's why I'm going to focus in my speech about the three main topics. The first one, so the non-Yemenis can understand the context. I'm going to give some characteristics of the Yemeni environment where al-Islah exists, or other components where the al-Islah is influencing and being influenced by this environment. The second topic, I will speak in general about the general characteristics of al-Islah because it will give a more comprehensive image of the landscape. And I will speak briefly about the role of al-Islah in the Arab Spring, because this is something that is requested from me, but I will focus more about the position or the stance of al-Islah from the Resolve Storm military operation. First, those who are not from the Yemeni context, maybe they don't understand the turning points or the changes that took place. Some people or this al-Islah was not present a lot, or it was absent, then it suddenly came. All of that because of the Yemeni nature or environment. This environment has certain characteristics. So we need to have a framework in order to understand or to analyze this issue. The Yemeni environment, of course, it has a lot of or excess in energy and population, and an excess of the energy in the Yemeni environment. This means that this environment is a confusing, unstable environment. The Yemeni environment also is a diverse environment. It has vertical and horizontal divisions, and these divisions affect any political force, whether it is al-Islah or others. Yemen is a prolonged or a chronic issue of instability, conflicts. This also affects any party or any entity or any political force. Also, the environment in Yemen is intertwined with an environment, the regional environment, and usually Yemen is the weak link in the regional aspect. So that's why we see that there is competition, or usually competitions happen on the Yemeni land. So when there was, for example, conflict between Ali Saleh and King Faisal, Yemen became the land, between Jamal Abdel Nasser and King Faisal, Yemen became the land of competition. And today, when we see the competition between Iran and the Gulf and Saudi Arabia, it is happening in Iran because Yemen is the weak link. So we see that accounts are being settled on the Yemeni territories. So all of that is to say that the landscape in Yemen is an unstable one. So when we speak about al-Islah, even if they have some favors that have provided to the society in terms of the components of the society or the reform in the society, this caused Islah to be in a crisis at some points, and even if they are part of the components, but they are not party to the conflict. And we see, because of this environment, we have conflicts with the Houthis and or with the others, and we are going to get into a new cycle of violence after what we have got, because the environment is unstable, and we have different historic, economic, and social aspects in this landscape, which made this landscape is sometimes gets into a lot of troubles. Also, in Yemen, we have religion is present strongly. That's why Yemen, a long history, it was the land of Judaism when Judaism was the international or the global religion, and then Christianity. When Christianity became the global religion, it was the land of Christianity, and now with Islam, it is like that. Then we have also a conflict of identities and the conflict of geopolitics. So for the first time, we have religious conflict with other religious identities. Now to talk about the al-Islah component, who is al-Islah? First of all, al-Islah Party has a good presence in the institutions of the state, unlike the other branches of Muslim Brotherhood in the Arab world, like in Tunisia or in Egypt. Since day one, al-Islah is present in the institution. Muhammad Mahmoud al-Zubairi was the first Secretary General of the Muslim Brotherhood in the 60s, was the Minister of the Education. Abdul Majid al-Zindani, he was the planning in the Al-Awqaf Minister. So all the leaders of Muslim Brotherhood since 1962 until today, they were present in oppositions in the state, and al-Islah was not away from authority at any day, in a way or another. So they were either within the authority without any conflict with the authority, or close to the authority. This allowed it to understand the society, improve their leadership, and to play active role. But this deprived al-Islah from the purity, because there is a lack of resources in the Yemeni, so there is corruption in the community. So it was affected by this corruption. So it lost its purity, and it couldn't attract a lot of people. When the Houthis came to Sana'a, they used this purity as their pretext, because they are coming from the mountains and they have never been to the part of the authority, and they used that as a justification. Then we have the issue of the question of identity. And when I talk about the identity here, I mean the national identity. In 1971, through the permanent constitution, Al-Islah, or the Islamic leadership, said that the Islamic Sharia is the only or the sole source of legislation, and that was fixed for all the legislations in Yemen, especially in the north. And after the unity, we have the committee for the legitimizing or legalizing the Islamic Sharia, and all the laws are in line with the Islamic Sharia. So there is no identity conflict between the Islam and secularism, as the case is in Egypt or Algeria or Tunisia. This thing was decisive in Yemen, and even the Socialist Party, because it is close to the Al-Islah, and it provided its vision in 2013, and the Socialist Party was a leverage for secularism, but we have the source of all laws is the Islamic Sharia. So there is no conflict about that. The Islamic started to appear with the presence of the Houthis, and it is about the religious interpretation, because the Houthis have a different interpretation of religion away from the identity and the interpretation of the Muslim Brotherhood, who were present and solidified in the state institutions. Al-Islah as a popular constituency, unlike a strong constituency, unlike Algeria or Tunisia or another country. Al-Islah have a wide constituency at the national level, from the north of Sada to Socotra in the south. In every town or village or neighborhood, there are people pro-Islah, and they are present out in all the national territories, and they cover all the area in Yemen, and that allowed Al-Islah to be active in the social and economic condition. But this puts responsibility or puts burdens on them, which means that when Al-Islah have any issues with other parties, usually when they have problems, they take a share that is proportionate to its size, and sometimes this puts them that under the accusation of the opposition that Al-Islah is in control. But in terms of the proportionality, they are taking the normal share of power or seats because of the size of constituency it has. Based on that, Al-Islah was present in all of these areas. So it's political thought which led them to get into war. For example, what happened in Aden, for example, it made them do that, but they couldn't, or the war that they were under, it couldn't allow the enemies to constrain Al-Islah in the south, because there is a wide constituency, and there is a wide a broad support ground for them. Unlike the Egyptian case or other cases, Al-Islah is present amongst the state institutions, social ranks, and in society. And this period was it was the largest until the year 2011, because Al-Islah, with its allies or its partners, it provided the best experience for that all the attributes can be provided to or given to Al-Islah, the Nasrist and the Socialist, because they made the best experience, because the social, the ideological and historic problems that happened, they avoid all of them, or they overcome all of them, and they built the state, and they overcome most of the problems that usually happen in the state. And that was a very important issue, and this is an experience that should be studied very well, because it is a distinguished and an unique experience that we can get a lot of lessons from it.
Al-Islah also offered some programs for the management of the state, not just the identity. When they introduced the political reform initiative, in addition to national achievement initiative for the state to deal with the different crises including in the south and in Saada, and in arranging its relations with Saudi Arabia, with the US, in addition to the form of the state, whether it's complex or a simple state. So Al-Islah had different aspects it worked upon since 2000. There was an absence of the dawah element. Since 1997, the dawah content in the literature of Al-Islah declined a lot, and we had instead a political discourse in refusal of the rise in prices and the rise of oil derivatives. Al-Islah in 2007 or 2003, if memory serves me well, issued a document on peaceful struggle for social demands, which is to address one of the most important documents, or addressed, sorry, one of the most important questions, which is despotism and authoritarianism. So in Yemen, the Arab Spring was not the first step in defying the authoritarianism. So we also had a liqa al-mushtarak led by Al-Islah that started to put pressure on the regime to establish political reform. So we had marches and protests present in Yemen even 2 years before the Arab Spring. Even Al-Islah and Al-Liqa al-Mushtarak had found a broader framework, which is the National Dialogue Committee, which also exercised the pressure on the people to take to the street to protest against government policy. So the way to the revolution was paved already before the Arab Spring. However, it's true that Al-Islah had a non-flexible, in a way, leadership that was a bit centralized geographically. So although it was a widespread and organized body, the decision-making was centralized in a certain locality, which is the governorate of Taz, which created a regional character for this decision-making process. And Al-Islah is usually addressed as part of the balance of power between the different components, as Al-Islah is regarded as a representative for that geographic locality. In terms of Al-Islah's attitude and position from the Arab Spring, we said that in 2003 it had this strategy, which is the peaceful struggle for freedoms and rights, and it trained its cadres, members, and even the public on the tools and mechanisms on popular mechanisms to demand and establish the demands for electoral mechanisms and freedoms and rights, as Mr. Yassin Saeed calls it, the electoral arena. So Al-Islah made a lot of capacity building in this regard and gave these demands some legitimacy and provided legitimacy to protests, becoming part of the tools of the political action. Tawakkul Karman was a leader of Al-Islah, and in 2009 she took part in 2009. Sorry, she took part in public protests in front of various ministries. So Yemen was on course towards a revolution or a public uprising, be it through the Arab Spring or through the momentum that was being built through اللقاء المشترك and الإصلاح. So, and the main leverage for the Yemeni revolution was al-Islah because of its broad constituency and financial resources and its broad alliances as well. So it contributed to the momentum of the revolution to take it from Sana'a to 17 governorates, making this revolution a Yemen revolution, and made people even in Aden take to the streets, and this made the local or group-based or minor demands decline in favor of pan-Yemeni demands. The only front where they struggled was Sada, otherwise their spread was paramount, but this also constituted a burden on al-Islah, as the revolution was accused of being a revolution of the Islah, and that the Islah was the puppeteer, etc. And the regime used those claims in mobilizing people against the revolution and deforming and disturbing the image of revolutionary people. However, it is noteworthy that the period of good work between the al-Islah and other parties was the thing, the asset which facilitated alliances after the revolution. So the Liqa al-Mushtarak parties quickly provided their names when it came down to elections. Why? Because they had already established a common vision for the state and for plurality, etc. And there was a consensus and agreement on the power sharing mechanisms. So the first part or the first half of the transitional period went smoothly because of this preparedness. In general, there are many studies on this aspect, so I suffice myself with this much, and I would like to move to the part where I talk about al-Islah and the storm of resolve. Okay, so I have 7 minutes. I will be as brief as possible. First of all, al-Islah tried as much as possible and exerted much effort to stop the country from sliding into war. If you follow the literature and the discourse of al-Islah, it's clear that it took several actions to prevent sliding into war and external intervention. The first was that it tried to rationalize the revolution of 2011. It was one of the courses because of the social plurality, because of the armament, because of the grievances. It erupted and it was prone to becoming an all-out war between those who are pro-change and those who are against change, but al-Islah prevented any kind of public resolve that was proposed in the revolution and opened the floor for compromises and agreements by rationalizing 2011. And in this rationalization, they stopped the Yemen from sliding into the Libyan or Syrian course of action. Al-Islah, after the revolution, was one of the most important actors and forces that helped and supported the National Coalition Authority and President Al-Mansur Hadi. Al-Mu'tamar, or the Congress, had 50% of the government, but it opposed it, while al-Islah shouldered much of the burden and supported the government in the media, society, and politically. It also offered concessions and compromises in order to make the National Dialogue Congress a success. And if you look at the number of seats for each of the components, you will understand what I mean. So the southern movement had 85 seats, the Houthis 87, while Al-Islah, despite its intensified social presence and intensified revolutionary presence, they only received 50 seats, which was a sacrifice to make this national dialogue congress a success. And they also attempted to support this dialogue in order to stop the Houthis from expanding and treading towards Sana'a. Al-Islah also made the Houthis start to feel that we, both you and ourselves, are put on the course to conflict, so we should both work to avoid this course of action. For example, they in a discussion between the two parties, the representative of Al-Islah told the Houthis very frankly that we are both put on a course where we will be doomed to conflict. Tell us how we are going to run the country and govern the country, and we will be with you. We will not oppose your authority. And the Houthis were lacking in political experience and young people, and were enthusiastic in the spirit of triumph, and they didn't understand and see what that means. And Hamid al-Ahmar told them that we are being pushed by the outside to a war, so we should do what needs to be done to avoid this end. However, Al-Islah, of course, sent a number of messages to the Houthis to avoid this end, but unfortunately they were not listened to.
The Houthis got into Sana'a, but in the last moment, the Islah pro people were withdrew, and Sana'a was handed over, which means that Sana'a was handed over for the Houthis, and they took Sana'a, and they said to the Houthis, the country is under your control now. These are the resources. You are responsible for them. This was an unannounced delivery or handover of the capital, Sana'a.
And it was potentially this that mitigated the way that the Houthis addressed Islah later, where they did not try to uproot it altogether. In the 29th of November 2015, they sent a delegation to Abdel Malik al-Houthi, headed by Shamsa, the head of the political department and the head of the Islah parliamentary bloc. This is in 2014, and the objective and the goal was to diffuse the situation between the Houthis and Al-Islah and to reach a specific understanding and a commitment, but unfortunately they did not respond. And Al-Islah declared that it's going to resend another delegation to the Houthis to avoid this course, disastrous course. In general, the Yemeni environment, with all its contradictions and complexities, have put Al-Islah, the Houthis, and all political blocs on this complicated political course. Al-Islah was the main party to support Abdullah Mansour Hadi and his authority, and shouldered much of the burden of the war in media means and political terms. But through my follow-up of the literature of this party, I believe a new school of thought or ideology has emerged within this party, and the Houthis have dealt with it as incitement. So they tried to deal with it. In their political discourse, they tried to adapt the conflict so to depict it as a conflict between those who staged the coup and between authority, which mitigated the level of the conflict, and they refrained from giving a sectarian character for the conflict. However, the Al-Islah social media and its members mobilized, and many of them used the sectarian terminology to, in the face of sectarian mobilization on at the side of the Houthis. But in general, their discourse was rationalized, and they tried to reduce this war to the minimum level, and their discourse was not identity-based or based on a conflict of identity, but depict the conflict on in terms of a political conflict against a party that staged a coup against the authority. And of course, there was political exclusion on the ground, particularly in the south. So Al-Islah had to offer a number of concessions and compromises in order to try to avoid a direct clash with the United Arab Emirates and to make the goals of the Arab alliance or coalition be reached. I believe that the latest development in terms of the removal of Abdullah Mansour Hadi is the last gesture that can be offered by Al-Islah, and by this Al-Islah would have stepped several steps back to strip Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates from any pretext or any excuse for not acting properly. At the same time, the presence of the state and would support many of the divisive and separatist demands of the transitional council, and it would mobilize a large strata for in the south of the people in the south. Al-Islah, if this failed, may not be involved in this alliance, and I think it would look for other options because it has exhausted its options and its tools with the Arab coalition. So I am sorry for taking too long. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this elaborate clarification, which offered some details that may not be well known for many in terms of the changes in the Islah party's external politics, particularly their attitude towards the Storm of Resolve and the military coalition. Now the final word goes to Dr. Fahad Al-Sultan about the lessons learned and post-war vision and future prospects.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Peace be upon you all.
في هذه الندوة.
I'd like to welcome you all in this symposium. It is such a great opportunity, and I would like to thank the organizers of this symposium. Actually, the situation in Yemen requires a lot of light shedding, particularly that has been marginalized over the past years, and many Arabs, let alone the world, until now don't understand the Yemeni question as much as they should, and they don't understand the nature of the war. Even 7 years on, and many Arab people don't understand the details because they are disregarded. We meet some people from the Arabs. They regard the war in Yemen as a war between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, although that's a complete misconception. That's why this symposium is very important, because studying those movements in the Arab world and Islamic world and Yemen is very important. And there are some good points that need to be shed light on, like al-liqa al-mushtarak, or the common meeting, which is one of the inspiring experiences with a number of Islamic leftist and Ba'athist parties who had always had clashes and political disagreements, were able to meet and unify their discourse and stand as a single front. It was a pioneering experience. I don't want to take too long in this introduction, but I would like to move into the future of al-Islah in this context. What my colleagues have mentioned is to shed light on this war and on this party in society, politics, and elsewhere. But I would shed light on the future of al-Islah after it has been involved in politics, elections, and participation in the Arab Spring and the pursuant war. I have the paper, but in this paper, the one that I'm going to read is only a summary, because this is such a broad title and it's not no simple undertaking to try to understand this. Al-Islah, unfortunately, has not been well considered and studied so far. That's why the number of studies that have examined this experience are very few, including one by Abdel Qawi Hassan by the Arab Unity Center in 2014, and another study by Dr. Nasser Al-Tawil, which is his dissertation for his master's degree, which was published in 2008. And those are some of the studies that will make us know more about al-Islah. And another study was issued in 2013. Other smaller studies were like by Al-Qaisi in 2015 and others. Within the party, as far as I know, over the past 20 years, we had only 2 studies. The first was about the idea and the track or the course of action, and the second was and this is one of the problems of al-Islah itself. In my understanding, the future of al-Islah faces 2 main challenges. The first is the external and the second is the internal. Externally, this is related to the regional and international regard to and attitude to al-Islah, particularly under the Russian-Ukrainian war. We know that over the past few weeks, we had this new transformation because for about 20 years, we had the war of terrorism where Islamists were targeted and there was a tight grip against them, and the authorities, including the regime in Yemen, that used this general discourse against its opponents, particularly the Islamists. So it was harmful for all Islamists, including al-Islah. So this openness now that opens the floor, as opposed to the past 20 years, for a new outlet. So what would al-Islah party, how would it make use of this transformation of policy from the war of terrorism? The other challenge is the regional challenge. The regional challenge, as my colleagues have mentioned, Yemen is a republic within a group of kingdoms or regimes that are different, but not only different, but also antagonist to the democratic or republic form of governance. I don't believe that the regional aspect is only related to the future of the Al-Islah, but to the future of Yemen as a whole, because if Saudi Arabia was able to maintain a smooth shift or transition of power within the ruling family peacefully or otherwise, it would reflect on Yemen. And we know that Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which are considered or called the counter-revolution countries, had a position, and Al-Islah now is paying a dear price for two reasons. First of all, because it advocated and supported the Arab Spring, and also because it adopted democracy, both of which are taboos for the Gulf states. From the regional challenge, we move to another level of challenges, which is the local challenge. There are a number of local challenges, which some of which are related to past events. One of them is a problematic issue that Mr. Mustafa mentioned in passing, which is the separation between religion and politics, which is an essential problem with Islah, because I wouldn't say they didn't resolve it, but they didn't want to work on it much, although it was resolved in Morocco with the Justice and Development Party, and it was resolved in Tunisia. But Al-Islah did not answer to that question, which begs the question whether they are a religious or a political group. And it is important for Al-Islah to answer this problem, because much of the ambiguity or the overlap is related to lack of separation between religion and politics. Are you a religious group or a political group? Also, one of the points mentioned as well was that Al-Islah was able to move a step forward in resolving the question whether it was affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. As it said, it was an extension of the national movement rather than the Muslim Brotherhood. The other issue is related to the change of leadership within the party itself, and this is quite critical, as my colleagues mentioned. And when you talk about democracy and power sharing, and you don't practice this within your own ranks, that's problematic. For example, now we have two main leaders in Al-Islah party on top or leading this party for more than 45. Mr. Abdullah Al-Anisi and Nejumi have been in this position for more than 45 years. One of them is 87. Imagine such a big party with a leader who is 87 and the other is 75. This is one of the problems and one of the issues that have to be addressed by the party. And there are young people and members who have to reach to leadership naturally, without waiting for existing leaders to die. Now, to speak quickly about the strengths and weaknesses. The strengths within Al-Islah is organizational cohesion. Undoubtedly, this strength was shown in the Arab Spring and the other escalations, and also in the 90s when they participated in the elections and also in the war. But the main challenge for their organizational structure was started in 2006, which is the threat that was felt by the Saleh regime, and started to engineer a number of targeting strategies. In my main paper, I mentioned that one of the issues for not getting the change and transformation in in Al-Islah was the elections of 2006, because Saleh felt an existential threat and this started to engineer action against this party and tried to make the leaders of Al-Islah to feel that there is an existential threat. So they started to believe that any change within their structure might eliminate them altogether. So if you look back to their document in their final communique, which the most important provision calling for the restructuring of the regulations and organization, it called for a comprehensive change in its structure. Al-Islah had this challenge, which is either to take forward this recommendation or stop where it was. So particularly with their relation in crisis with Saleh and the regime, and because Al-Islah was considered and affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood. So one of the strengths was this organizational cohesion, which was quite strong, as we can see since 2014, when the number of targeting mechanisms used against it are enough to topple a state, let alone a party. Also, they are quite flexible in terms of their policy and politics. Whoever interacts with them, actually, this pragmatism or practicality was at the expense of some of their principles, and they always say that they work on the lesser evil principle, and they try to avoid clashes and collusions. This at their own expense sometimes. It is also one of the parties that did not go into confrontation with the authority except in 2011 and 2015. In terms of weaknesses of Al-Islah, the first point was the women complex. The women complex is such a big one with Al-Islah. In 2012, I had a dialogue with Muhammad Qahtan, may he be released and liberated, who is one of the biggest leaders of Al-Islah, and he's now in prison, and he's been imprisoned by the Houthis since 2015. He's actually forcibly disappeared. No one knows about his fate or whereabouts. This is one of the leaders of Al-Islah. 7 years to date, his family knows nothing about him. And the Houthis refused to even give any statement about his health or situation. And he's also one of the most prominent leaders of Al-Islah. This was probably advised by Ali Abdullah Saleh that you should take away this mastermind of the party, because this would be a deadly blow. So, but to go back to my main point, the women complex in 2012, Al-Qahtan said that women and the youth are will witness a great transformation in the upcoming elections, or in the 5th conference, which has not been convened since 2007. And it is noteworthy that Al-Islah was the only political party whose conferences have been so regularly held between the 90s and until 2007, 4 conferences until 2007, when they clashed with Saleh, and in fear of being threatened, they did not have their 5th conference. And I believe Al-Islah should go into its 5th conference, and the longest it takes and the more delay it makes, the more damage it incurs. The other question is the issue of the civil question, in which Al-Islah has developed quite much, but hasn't resolved this question. So although it has separated the dawah from the politics, but the missing part was the intellectual question. And unfortunately, Al-Islah in its structure was built on different resources which was mainly Salafi and Dawah based, but no longer paid enough attention to intellectual development. And this is an important issue for Al-Islah to resolve, because through this intellectual development, they could answer to the questions of women, secularism, civil state, and resolve many such questions. But the problem with Al-Islah is that it's trying to resolve them politically rather than intellectually.
One of the points with Al-Islah is also how to deal with the leadership of the party, and how the party sometimes the leadership is not dealing with the grassroots for a long time, because of the they are dealing with the dawah discourse, and they are not using an intellectual and political discourse with those grassroots. If they do that, it will be better. In conclusion, very quickly, the evaluation of this experience, we call on the party to have an evaluation of its presence, and to have and to share it with its members, and to give a wider space for the intellectual people and to the thoughts, and to learn from the experience of others and their achievement, especially the Islamic movement in the Arab world. They have good experience in this field. Re-identify themselves, whether it is a political party that are practicing politics, or a social or a societal reform movement, and revisiting their positions toward the religious issues. Are they employing religion in politics and restoring its image amongst the minds of people, and whether they are what led to the imamhood to have to take control, and here we mean the Houthis, and to encourage the youth to get into the leadership positions in the party. And Al-Islah have a problem or fear. So Hamas, when Israel wanted to eliminate Hamas went back to the strategy of regenerating the leadership, and those leaders were young leaders, were more active than other leaders, and Israel couldn't eliminate Hamas. So this is one of the fears, that in Al-Islah leadership, if they are under pressure of the regime, and there was some of the leaders under control, the party maybe will be weaker in the future. But the party that can generate new leaders, no other force can target it or eliminate it. In addition to that, there should be an elimination of the vertical decline or weakening that is happening, and there should be a strong monitoring or solid monitoring measures for the future, in order not to cover on the corrupt people and financial or administrative corruption that is happening. The organic affiliation of the party with other groups outside the Yemen needs to be discussed, but there are a lot of issues that need to be solved. Taking care of the history of Yemen, its figures, and giving a space of that. And unfortunately, the Islamic movements were talking about Islamic or using Islamic curricula, and not talking about the national aspect of their affiliation. And finally, to have think tanks or strategic studies in order to do analysis and studies, because Al-Islah doesn't have directly a studies center that takes care of those issues. And finally, remove any doubts that there are Hashimi figures that are taking or in positions of authority that are using this, because this is a problematic and needs to be resolved. Thank you very much, Mr. Sultan, for your presentation and for your comments on the lessons learned and the future prospect. I would like to thank all the lecturers on these visions and this experience and this in-depth understanding. This could be the beginning and not the end of this study, because this is an experience that requires to understand and to study further. I believe that all the experience that we are doing now, which is the studying the Islamic experience or the Islamic movement's experience in around the Arab world after 70 years or 7 decades, it requires more in-depth understanding. This will be the beginning, and I believe that we will have, or this will be issued in a number of volumes. And by the way, all of this experience that we have presented, it is not 1 or 2 hours. Each experience takes 3 hours as we do. So on YouTube now, we have over 100 hours of studying these experiences from Sudan, Tunisia, Egypt, Iran, Kuwait, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and we will continue. We still have other experiences, and we will, until the end of the year, we have this work, and we will have another conference to present all of these experiences together. And each movement has its own characteristics. I learned a lot from the speakers, and I believe that there is a necessity to understand that. Now, because of the lack of time, there will be no place for comments. We have a lot of attendees. Maybe we will take your comments in the next session, but for each speaker, I will give you 4 minutes each if you want to add something or elaborate something or have a comment, and then we will move to lunch break, and then we will get back at 3 o'clock Istanbul time for our next session. And we will start with the same order. I will start with Mr. Adnan Al-Udaini. If you want to say something in 4 minutes, please. Yes, thank you. I would like to continue some of the points that I didn't continue in my first. First of all, the relation with the societal structures. We have 3 experiences. We have the experience of the division with the South, or with the relation with the National Congress or the Public Congress, and we have another third. And of course, this is
الاجتماعية في الجنوب ولا التدليل الذي حصلت عليه مع الشعب العام حرص على إدماج القبيلة في العملية السياسية.
We wanted to have a good relation with the political party, and that's why we saw that it resolved its problems with ISIS without using weapons. After the Yemeni unity, Al-Islah didn't get with Saleh immediately because they opposed Saleh when he was at the peak of his strength. But actually, they were with the legitimacy of the state, and they managed to solve some of the controversial issues, and they were with the parliament and the rights of the state to for self-determination. So when they were against the trends of Ali Abdullah Saleh, after that period, they were in a period that they opposed the authority of Saleh for the sake of legitimacy, and they also were in the opposition of the political system when they became in so the political system when they became in the opposition. And we are talking about the experience, and the experience says that a lot of the issues that were problematic, whether the relation with the different parties or the issues that are related with the with women, they were put to election, to voting, and result in that way. So there were practices that are decided by the party. When we talk about partnerships, we are talking about a party that had partners with different parties, with the authority, with the opposition, and with different parties. So talking about the exclusion and the lack of partnership, this is something that needs to be reviewed. All the political parties have lived or are living this problem, but Al-Islah recognizes the reality, and it starts from them with
تقدم وضع المرأة، وكان بالتدريج المرأة تصعد في السلم
problems through the different conferences. The enmity or adversity that it has with the Houthis, because the imamhood, destroyed the societal system and the political system that was present in Yemen, and there was a problem with the imama or the imamhood. The relation with the other Islamic movement, this is not something that in 2016 or 2017, but the Secretary General spoke about that early on about this issue, and he talked on Al Jazeera about this issue. As for the internal democracy of the party, it is the only party in Yemen that provides localities. They elect their representatives in the General Congress without getting into the Shura Council. And Al-Islah amended its bylaws, and it added a provision that gave the localities to this right. Although this is a dangerous amendment, and some of the parties within the party said that this is federalism within the organization, and it gave localities more strength or more weight than the center. But this is something that is present in the bylaws right now. Between 2009 until now, we need to have a safe environment to work. We don't have that safe environment, and if we have a safe environment to work, we can solve a lot of problems that has to do with the self-performance or with the bylaws. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Adnan. And now we give the floor to Mr. Mustafa. The comments or the interventions that came after mine. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to have the microphone again. I have a simple addition. Talking about the general or the foreign relations that were built between 1997 and 2011, and how Al-Islah interacted with it. At that time, the issue of counterterrorism was the most important one, not only in Yemen, but Yemen was one of the hot spots for this issue, because there were some foreign interests were targeted from Yemen, and it became the only paradigm that was used. So Yemen as a state that was harmed, and Al-Islah as a party was harmed as well. This crisis at the same time opened new opportunities for communication between Al-Islah party and foreign countries like the United States. At the time, there was a program that was through which some Yemenis were taken to the United States, an exchange program, and some of those students were from within Al-Islah. So Al-Islah had other opportunities away from the region. The other point, within the counterterrorism, it was an opportunity for closing the institutes, the scientific institutes. It lost some of its institutes, but it pushed it to move from the da'wah to a political movement, and it became into the opposition, and that's in line with what my colleagues talked about. The other point is that at that time, Qatar started to appear as a regional power. So the roots that are from the Muslim Brotherhood in the Hizb al-Islah led to having good relations between Al-Islah and Qatar. Around the year 2000, there was the borders agreement that was signed with Saudi Arabia. So the relation was stronger. Ali Abdullah Saleh monopolized that relation. And the relations with Saudi Arabia went back after the war with the Houthis, because there was a need to reactivate local traditional forces, whether the Muslim Brotherhood or others.
هذه من النقاط التي تحتاج إلى دراسة أكثر.
These are some of the points that require more study. Al-Islah didn't provide any literature about it, and there is no study about them.
السؤال الذي إذا كانوا
The question that Mr. Sami said, if we can talk about the relation between Al-Islah Party and Saudi Arabia. We don't have a lot of literature. Al-Islah didn't provide information about that, and the relation of Al-Islah with the Saudi Arabia is similar to the relation of Yemen with Saudi Arabia. It has a lot of problems. However, when the other Arab centers were weaker, Saudi Arabia became stronger. We were talking about the 70s and 80s. So the wing in the Islamic Arab that were more inclined with the Muslim Brotherhood, they became more inclined with the Salafism. So this is an ideological point that we can talk about. At that time, Saudi Arabia was promoting Wahhabism and Salafism in the Arab world. Al-Islah in general in Yemen, they have good relations with everyone, including the leftist groups, in order to coexist. I can't speak more than that about this because I don't have documents about that. But the discourse of Al-Islah at that period, which was a period of partnership with Al-Islah to face the Houthi problem, it was a discourse that this is a shared destiny that they have together. The point that I want to talk that there were good good models that are attractive to Muslims, like Malaysia and Turkey. Turkey after 22, it had a different regional policy, and that led to building bridges that were even stronger after 2011, because Turkey has a positive position towards the Arab Spring, and that's why we have a lot of Islamists in Turkey. Talking about the Al-Islah Party, we are calling it a party because it is a political entity. But talking about the party is different because it is different from other political parties. The socialist and the leftist, they are a state party because they were born from within the state, not from outside the state. But Al-Islah was a widely spread one, and it was limited with its resources and its spread and afterwards. So it was a party of the authority. It was then limited and it couldn't recover. When Saleh was in the opposition, he was as saboteur, not an opposition. From 2011 to 2014, the Public Congress had half of the government, and it was in control of the military and security, but it was playing with the mentality of a saboteur, not an opposition. So he corrupted and sabotaged the entire country. So Al-Islah had this different relations according how close it was to the authority. We can say that it is a civil party. It might transform further according to the changes that happen, and if it was able to make the leap that it made between the 2000 and 2010, it might improve better. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mustafa. And now we give the microphone back to Mr. Nasser Al-Tawil.
طيب شكرا كثيرا. يعني هي ربما في نقطتين على السريع.
Thank you so much. We have two points. What Mr. Mustafa mentioned about the extraordinary role in the politics of Al-Islah and its relation with the state, and it contributed to maturing the resources of the party, which allowed it to address the problems of the society and to work in the state, and it is more appropriate to manage the state. But Al-Islah as well has an experience in dealing with chronic historical problems. For example, in Yemen, we don't have sectarianism, but we have a different school of thoughts or madhabi differences, and it has to do with the geographic distribution. So, which means in a certain geography, we have a certain party that is affiliated with the Zaydi madhab, and then the Shafi'i madhab is in different areas, etc., etc. So these are chronic sensitivities between the Zaydi madhab or school of thought and others. The main idea of the Zaydi madhab is the governance, which believe that governance should be limited to the house of Muhammad and the descendants of the house of Muhammad. This leads to some tensions, but the Islamic movement, and this is one of the characteristics of it. This problem has been there for hundreds of years, but the Islamic movement in the 1970s managed to overcome this obstacle and solve it quickly through the curricula and education systems in the state, because they adopt what is agreed upon in Islam with between the different school of thoughts. So all of the outputs of the general education curricula and the general discourse of the state and the legislations and laws, we were of course, we said that it is decided that all the laws are in line with the Islamic Sharia. So, in the provisions of the constitutions, they are taken from all the school of thoughts. So, we have outputs in the laws and legislations. We have outputs in the education, outputs in the general or public discourse. So, these tensions between the school of thoughts disappeared completely in the 70s and 80s until the Houthi came back, and the Islamic movement provided a pioneering experience in these issues, which means that we have a division and we have wars now, and parts of these wars have sectarian nature, but the experience to deal with this issue in the 70s and afterwards, it shows that this sectarian or madhabi conflict will be overcome very quickly because of the experience that the Islamic Party has. Thank you. Thank you. The last word will be with Mr. Fahd al-Sultan if he has any addition. You don't have any? Okay, thank you very much for this session. It was a very important session, and a number of ideas and propositions were presented. As I said, they will be printed out in a volume or in a book. And in the second session, we are going to continue talking about some of the topics that were mentioned quickly. We will start around the 3 o'clock Istanbul time, which means 1 hour and 20 minutes from now. We will have some interventions about the issues related to democracy, the peculiarity of the experience, the issue of the new generation, and what is the overlap between the political and the dawah or the party and the dawah movement, and the means of agreement or disagreement with the others. Now we will have lunch and we will go to prayer. First we will pray and then we will go to the cafeteria for lunch, and we will get back at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed.